thank you so much for coming. It's really gratifying to see um, friends and family and everybody out there. I want to say thank you especially to Antje, Bernd, and Takt for this invitation. My connection to Takt is, I consider, an important part of my artistic community. So I'm very happy to be actively involved in their projects. Um, and I want to thank Ben for facilitating this and acting as host. So by way of introduction, my background is primarily in music. I'm a saxophonist from childhood, and I trained in college and graduate school as a composer. And my current artwork grew out of my practice in electronic and computer music, as well as a long interest in art theory. And I hope in this talk to explain my interest in processes and my commitment to a kind of experimental disposition towards creative work. And I'm going to mostly talk about my visual work. I write computer programs to visualize the processes that I'm thinking about. And typically, I don't know in advance the precise output of these processes, but I'm interested in information-rich systems, systems where patterns emerge in unexpected ways. And these systems have many degrees of freedom. Small changes to initial conditions often result in surprising changes in the behavior of the system and surprising changes in the results. So let me give some examples. I'm going to share my screen for a while. So I'm going to just start by showing you a computer program that I wrote. And this system that I call Snarl, I've been using for a number of years now. And it's got enough flexibility that I continue to use it to generate artwork. I start off by simulating an arm, an articulated arm, moving in space. So here you can see I've got this arm moving in a virtual three-dimensional space. And at the end of the arm is a drawing implement. You can see I draw a trace. And the movement of the arm is controlled by periodic functions or modulated periodic functions. So for example, sine waves and modulated sine waves are a way that I can use to control the angles at each point of articulation in the arm. This is a three-dimensional system, so you can see that I can rotate it, and it has a different look from different angles. And when I'm playing with this system and trying to design output, I have a number of parameters I can control. For example, the length of each segment of the arm, the range of motion for each articulation. I can control the camera view, so I can zoom in and out like I just did here. I can control the frequency of movement, the speed of movement at each articulation. And I can also control the frame rate. So if I'm sampling at a very fast frame rate, then I'm getting a very smooth path. And if I slow down the frame rate, like I'm doing here, you can see that each point in the arm's location is connected by a straight line. And so I get a more jagged result. The functions that are controlling the movement can also be modulated, and they can be modulated by random offsets so that I can get a degree of noisiness or randomness to the pattern. let me show an example of what this might look like. Here's a variation. And you can see I start with a bunch of fingers on the end of the arm that are all drawing. And so there's a lot of ways this basic system can be changed and manipulated to get a variety of different results. I've been exploring this system for over 5 years now, and it's nowhere near exhausted in its ability to surprise me and come up with new patterns. The relationship between the frequencies of movement in the various segments of the arm, if they're in simple ratios to each other, then we get duty cycles or attractors. So the arm returns on to the same path. And you can see in this example, the traces are retracing paths that they previously traversed. And you can see some of the paths are becoming darker as a result. More complex frequency relationships are going to result in more complex figures with less redundancy. So let me just show some of the stills that have come out of this system. This is a series called Flourish. This is a series called Scaffold. In this, you can see two different sampling rates. So I've got straight lines and I've got smooth lines. So I'm exploring that difference between smoothness and straightness. This is a series called Synapse. Excuse me. Nope. Hold on a second. So it's called Synapse because I was very interested in how these caustics almost touch. And I was intrigued by those moments in this figure. And by the way, when I say series, this whole series is in fact the same object, the same three-dimensional object that's been drawn by the system I demonstrated a minute ago. And we're just looking at different rotations and details of the same object. So the geometry of an object like this is rich enough that you can see a world of difference just by rotating and zooming in on different areas of it. So another way I explore this system is by translating the arm across a two-dimensional space and filling up a two-dimensional space. In this series, what I did was I attached a virtual spring between various segments of the arm. So we get a kind of chaotic pattern that happens, a different kind of set of attractors. Here, the figure is being wrapped around a geometric primitive, just this orange rectangle. So I was kind of interested in this series between the contrast of a two-dimensional object and a three-dimensional object. Most of my work is in black and white, but I have some experiments with color. This is a series called Balanced Action. The color palette is sampled from a photograph. This is a photograph of my saxophone. And so I'm doing a random walk sampling the color values in this photograph in order to choose the colors for the lines. Here's a similar experiment. The color palette here is chosen from this. So I'm sometimes exploring the colors taken from old masters. Go back. Let me talk about a different series. This is a series called Babel, and it was inspired by an invitation from Antje to do a show that was based around the short story Library of Babel by Borges. And in Borges' story, he talks about a library filled with texts that are randomly generated, and all possible random texts exist somewhere in this vast library. So the idea of generating an invented alphabet and random texts using an invented alphabet intrigued me, and so I worked on this. So here are some examples. They're hard to see when you see the whole page, but I have some details as well. And I'm working with Borges in his story supplies a kind of recipe for his alphabet. He says there are 25 characters, including the punctuation, and each page has 40 lines per page with 80 characters per line. And I follow that recipe from Borges. I generate an alphabet of 25 characters. And you can see the alphabets vary radically from one to the next in the number of strokes that they use per letter, in the weight of the strokes, in whether I'm using straight lines or splines. The size of the font, and so on. So out of this project came, here, let me close some things down here so I can find what I'm looking for. Got too many windows. Excuse me while I find what I'm looking for here. So out of this project came this series where I similarly generated figures that were like the figures that I was generating for my alphabets, and I laid them out in grids and just explored systematic rotations of those figures. Sometimes the rotations are controlled by a very regular function. Sometimes I'm using some kind of random number function or gradient random function to rotate the figures. But basically, I've got a 12 by 12 grid of the same figure being rotated in three-dimensional space. and just repeated. In a similar way, this system works in a similar fashion, but the rotations are translated across a straight line. This system is called chaîné, which just refers to the kind of dance move that involves spinning while moving across the stage. So I was kind of interested in representing movement in time, like sequential photographs, like the Muybridge photographs or something like that. And they have a dance-like spinning quality that really intrigued me. I have a series that uses hold on a second, my mouse working here. So this system involves a field of vectors laid out on a tight grid, and so there's lines on a grid, and then I rotate each line, usually according to some gradient noise function. And so it generates oftentimes these dense mats of lines that map the noise functions. I can also use the endpoints of the lines as vertices for simple geometry, like this. So this is a much less dense grid. And now we're back to some more examples of these thick mats of lines. So I'm fascinated by the idea that the basic process can have a lot of different consequences. The process can be expressed in a lot of different ways depending on whether I'm using solid shapes or whether I'm drawing with heavy lines or thin lines. There's a lot of creative possibility, even though the basic process remains the same. Um, my my latest system, let's see if I can find this for you. This is the most recent work I've been doing. These pieces are based on a hexagonal grid. It's a system I call tessellations because it's based on these grids. And then I modulate the vertices of the pieces of the grid using random functions or using regular periodic functions. And before I show you too many more of these, I can give you a kind of little demo of this. This is a glimpse into the program that I'm using. It's called Max MSP, and a lot of musicians use it for signal processing and sound generation, but there are also libraries for doing graphics and linear algebra, so I'm using them to do some graphic work. And here you can see I've generated a grid that's based on these hexagons. And let me get this going again here. Hold on, I think I turned it off. And you can see that by changing parameters, I can change various things about the density of the grid. Right now it's set up as 12 by 12, but it could be 50 by 12. So I can change all sorts of parameters that way. Here's what I mean by a gradient noise function. This is just a two-dimensional matrix of random numbers. They're expressed as colors here, but there's the transitions between the numbers are smoothed. So that interpolation is what I mean by gradient noise. And noise functions can be generated a lot of different ways, so there's a lot of variety there. I can use these to modulate the positions of the vertices, so you can see that this noise matrix is modulating the grid. I can change the scale of the noise. Down here you can see the noise function changing. You can change the amount of the noise, how much it's modulating the positions. I can also use just random offsets for the positions without gradients. And that creates a different kind of irrationality in the figures. And I can animate things, like right now I'm just animating the position that I'm sampling from the noise matrix. And if I use that to modulate things, then I create a kind of animation here. And I can overlap various samples of this output, of this animation, to create a sense of movement in the resulting still. And that's how I achieve the kind of densities that you see in some of the examples that I've been showing you. So if we go back to, hold on a second, go back. To these. So these figures are generated by the system that I just demonstrated. And for me, this way of working is very much analogous to a way of working with music. In music, oftentimes I'm thinking about periodic functions like sine functions, for example, a standard way that electronic music is generated, functions modulating each other using functions like sine functions to change parameters continuously. These densities, as I just showed you, are generated by a kind of animation. So I'm always thinking about analogies to movement in time or change in time, which is a primary concern of musical composition. All right, that is plenty of visual information for you folks to take in a half hour. So I'm going to spare you any more, and I'm going to turn the conversation over to Ben and to questions.
Cool. Thank you so much, Frank. That was wonderful. I'm just going to pull up my questions I had written. I was reflecting on your work and thought I should prepare because there's a lot to dig into there. So let's do this. So my first question to you is your work has a very balanced approach to interactivity and cybernetics. How and where do you personally draw the line between these two aspects, or is there a line at all?
Well, cybernetics is this study of systems and information. And so interactivity is kind of at the core of cybernetic thinking, because one of the important things in cybernetics is the idea that the observer is part of the system. So thinking about the system as an environment and as the person observing, both as a spectator and as a creator, they're implicated in the system itself. We're part of the system. So this is an essential part of cybernetic thinking, and it also implicates things like as observers and as participants in the system, we're also implicated in the social structures that we're part of. So, so yes, the artwork is in some ways an analogy to things like my my consciousness, my awareness, but it's also an analogy to the decisions made on larger scales, on social structures. It can function as a metaphor for um, social interactions, for decision taking and agency on many different scales.
Kind of to bounce off of that is, do you find your work to be very meditative in watching the process, and there's like this aspect of like pareidolia where you're giving the audience the ability and the space, I would also say, to make their own conclusions about the subjectivity of your work. Is that a meditative process, or is that a leading question perhaps? Yikes.
Yeah, I know, like, oftentimes I'm in the position of watching the work unfold. So, like the first system that I showed you, where there's this arm drawing in space, um, I spend hours like watching the thing draw, and trying to evaluate um, at what point is it more enriching or less enriching, or more interesting or less interesting. Um, there's a certain meditative aspect to that for sure. In the video animations that I produce using these systems, oftentimes there's a kind of meditative aspect where these complex geometries are just slowly rotating or slowly being modulated. And, and the idea is that we continue to discover new aspects, new information, unanticipated information that's slowly revealed by the emergent properties of the system. So, so, I, so yeah, I do sometimes find it meditative.
I found it very, very meditative, especially your moire patterns. Those are very beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And I wrote this before, and I don't think we need to ask this again, but what software and programs you use to compose and perform? I think you answered that pretty well. But unless there was anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm primarily using Max MSP. I mean, in the past I've used things like processing, which is a super class of Java for you programmers out there. I've used C and things like that, but I'm not really a coder. Um, and Max is comfortable for me to use, but I think uh, people could use many different systems to do very similar work.
Cool. And where does a piece begin for you? How do you begin the process of composing, inventing, or discovering a piece?
Um, Sometimes I'm just interested in a particular systematic relationship. Um, so that's a very abstract thing. Sometimes I'm interested in certain mathematical relationships that I want to explore. Sometimes I'm working out things in a sketchbook like a traditional artist, and it gives me ideas about uh, turning that into a formal procedure that I can code. Sometimes I'm working on certain kinds of formal processes in music, and I imagine what would it be like to visualize these things. Um, and I'm looking at shapes and patterns in nature and in the world around me. I mean, that those are just life experience is a constant source of ideas. I'm looking for systems in my lived experience.
Nice. And I think this will be my last question. Your visual work has a very phenomenological under and overtone. What other questions are you exploring when making visual works? Is there a bleeding into your sonic work as well?
Hmm. Well, I've like my thinking is very much influenced by the tradition of phenomenology, uh, and phenomenology is very concerned with the structure of experience. And I think when we explore systems, and this is a very cybernetic idea as well, the idea that the observer is part of the system that they're exploring, uh, we're really exploring the structure of consciousness and the structure of not just my individual consciousness, but also of collective consciousness. So, uh, in that way, artistic system is a kind of phenomenological free variation that hopefully helps us discover something about the way we see the world or listen in the world or um, interact with the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's all the questions that I got. So if anyone else wants to jump on in, join the conversation, we can make this a symphonic party.
Yes, I would like to. Hi, my name
Bernd,
is Bernd. Bernd, yes, hi. How are you doing?
yeah, good. Good to see you, Bernd.
I just remember Brunswick somehow, but you're not in Brunswick right now.
I am in Brunswick right now.
You are, okay.
Yes.
Wow, that's even nicer. I have one question. Do you also improvise inside your system you work with, like you improvise while you play saxophone in a group or solo? Do you have that experience, and how is that? Is it similar or is it different?
Wow, wonderful question, really. I mean, and uh, when you see someone working with formal systems like I do, one of the questions people have right away is, "Oh, this looks like a very clinical process. Where's the interactivity really?" But I am an improviser, And one of the reasons I like working with the software that I do, Max, is because it's a very real-time process, and I can change these parameters on the fly. And as you saw in the little demonstration with the tessellation system, uh, I can be changing parameters and seeing the results in real time. And uh, yeah, I mean, this is a very seductive process. Like I can go and tweak things all day and watch uh, intriguing pictures unfold on my screen. At some point, decisions have to be made about letting the system go. So there's this constant dialectic between intervention and improvisation, and uh, and a a kind of experimental attitude where I have to let go and let the conditions that I've set up unfold to the consequences of the system, and let the system reveal things that I don't anticipate through direct intervention. So there's this interesting back and forth, and I think I have to be very careful not to intervene with my ego-driven uh, uh, improvisations all the time. And at some point, I have to um, submit to the life and potentials of the system and let it unfold on its own. So,
Okay. Well, I have another related question to this that brings me back to sound, of course, because you are also a musician, you are a sound artist. So is there a connection towards sound when you work like this? Or do you also make sounds from and with this system?
yeah, so the systems I use to produce sound pieces are very similar. They're really analogous systems. Um, they're not exactly the same because uh, our visual systems and our hearing systems work kind of on different time scales. So uh, when I'm generating sound waves, the time scales are very different. Um, but the systems are analogous to each other, and also the kind of relationships that we hear are reflected in the relationships that we see. So, for example, when the when I have this articulated arm moving, if the various joints are moving in harmonic relationships to each other, that is, in frequencies that are simple integer multiples of each other, then there's a certain amount of harmonicity in the patterns. If those relationships are very dissonant or much more complex ratios, then the patterns are much more complex. If there's randomness, which we would hear as noise, or you can see that in the irrationality of the visual structures. So there's really a direct relationship between our auditory experience and our visual experience. And I'm keenly aware of that since I compose in both media.
Okay. Do you have an example you could play for us? A sound example.
Uh-huh. Just a moment. I'm going to go back to screen share. And hold on a second. So this is a short piece animation using a modulated grid, and the sine functions that I'm using to modulate the positions of these lines are very similar to the sine functions I'm using to modulate the selection of sound samples and change their characteristics.
Oh, please don't stop.
Sorry. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't incorporate a lot of video into this presentation is because the streaming and the frame rate and the sound the quality is just compromised by the Zoom session. So I
Yeah,
think there are better places for me to share video with people.
yeah. But is it possible? I'm sorry, I'm just talking here. Do you have where can I buy the CD? Or download the files?
So I have a music site, but I have a SoundCloud site that has a lot of sound pieces on it. There's a YouTube channel that has some video and sound, but honestly, I have yet to really present a lot of my video work online for people. So,
hey, Frank.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Frank, I just had a subjective reaction to some of these images. And what they suggested a lot to me was textile work, especially the simpler, almost tessellated kind of examples that you had. And I was wondering, I know that you do a lot of, I use, paper substrates and printed medium, but I wondered, is there any interest in other media for translation of some of these images, like textiles perhaps, or even metalwork or whatever?
Well, I would be interested. And I've taken kind of first steps in exploring controlling a laser cutter with these processes. During COVID, I've been trying to get away from the screen since I'm like on Zoom sessions all day long. And I can share my screen again. Hold on. And hold on a second. Let me see if I can find this for you. So let me just bring all these into preview here. Sorry about I'm gonna get this. So I've been working on Lino types, Lino cuts, and Lino prints.
You just moved it off the screen that's active for your screen sharing.
Thank you. Here? Is that it?
Much better.
Okay, thank you. Got too many screens. Nope, we don't want smileys. Gee whiz. Okay, let's just do it this way. So these are Lino cuts that I'm working on now.
Very nice.
Love them.
And in some ways, these are very much like influenced by textiles, like they're Japanese textile patterns. And this pattern actually comes from manga backgrounds. But I, of course, formalized the system a little bit more than manga does. And this is a drawing that's on my drawing board this week, but very much influenced by Japanese textiles. And here's just some stuff I'm working out on paper. So that's a sort of roundabout way, Chris, of saying, yeah, I am interested in other media, and I'm looking for opportunities. I've also tried doing some things with photographic printing methods, like I've done some cyanotypes, and I've got the chemistry for doing platinum prints on my desk, but I haven't opened that up yet. But so, yeah, good things are coming. Thanks for asking.
Hey, Frank, this is Paul Marquardt. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm so glad that we got a chance to kind of hook back up after many years.
Great to hear you.
Yes, it really is. And this is really, really beautiful, beautiful work. I'm really just, I'm loving this.
Thanks.
I have a really specific question. I put it in the chat. I look behind you and I see pieces printed out on a wall.
Yep.
But also you're showing us our work. You're showing us your work on a screen. And I'm actually looking at I have a huge screen I'm looking at. So can you comment on to how you believe, like how you think your work would be viewed or consumed physically on a physical medium as opposed to on a screen?
Yeah, so I do print it out on a high quality inkjet printer, and it looks very different printed out. And you know, I print out a lot of stuff because I really think it's a very different thing printed. And you probably have this experience too, because I know you do very detailed graphic work, computer generated.
Exactly.
Sure,
And sometimes it just can't render on a physical screen.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these, you know, on the screen, the lines are sometimes just 1 pixel, and there's aliasing artifacts and all sorts of crazy stuff. And when you print it out, it's just wonderfully different. So I'm very much committed to the physical thing. Yeah.
What about the experience of the person viewing the work?
I think the scale is enormously important because, you know, when you have something, you know, like the one behind me that's like, you know, 120 centimeters square or something, you have a very different physical relationship to the piece because of its scale. Or if you have something that's very small and intimate. So I think that's really important. I also think that like systems where I simulate arms drawing and things have a gestural quality that people really experience as with an identification with gestural movement, embodied movement. And I think that recognition and identification is so much part of the experience. And it doesn't really exist on the screen. Yeah, you need to see it.
Sure, awesome. And one last thing, do you, with maybe things getting better, if you want to say that, do you have anything planned to show like in a physical space?
So in July, I'll be doing a solo show at the University of Maine in Orono. So that's the only thing that I've got going. Although I know that in the summer I'd like to do something at Takt, and we're talking about that. But that will probably be an online show. And also right now I've got a couple of small pieces in an online exhibit that's based in Europe. I can provide a link for people, but they're just yeah, 2 small pieces. But as far as a physical show, I just have this show in July.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Frank, can you hear me?
Yeah, Konstantin.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thanks for those great visuals. I really, really enjoyed all of those. Yeah, great combinations. Look really cool. So my question is less into the technical ways of how you create those paintings, and more of a personal question. What actually got you started down this road? Because I'm more used to traditional artists, like working with a pen in their hand or playing with an instrument, and now you're going in this computer direction. So what prompted that?
I mean, as a young person, I did a lot of drawing for my own pleasure, but you know, I've made music for a long time using digital systems, so visualizing those processes using the same tools was not such a big step. Um, you know, yeah, if you've worked a lot with electronic music, then making the step to producing visuals is not such a huge leap.
That does make sense. And what got you into electronic music then? How'd you start out on that?
Yeah, I mean, electronic music, you know, as a young person, someone introduced me to a old Moog synthesizer, a real analog electronic system. Uh, it was a wonderful kind of toy playground for discovering sounds and really novel sound combinations that I couldn't make on the instruments I was playing. I was playing piano and saxophone and then uh, in college I took more electronic music courses um, and gradually became more interested in the system possibilities of automating those processes. And yeah, so that's sort of the life path that led me to where I am now.
Yeah, so it's actually quite a natural path, I'd say. Cool. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks.
Hello, Frank. I wonder if you follow up that idea with the three-dimensional and with the 3D lenses. This was a very impressive show when you've been here in Berlin. I just wonder if you are following up this idea to put it into visual three-dimensional thing where you can go into the sculptures. This was an interesting experience, I must say. It was something unique, and I would like to see this again somehow. It's now, because of technical, it's very enormous technical equipment that you need for this. Or is it now coming into kind of public domain? If I have a good graphics card, I can take an interface from you, and then I can see these files in 3D. Or is this, is this coming into some near future? Or what do you think?
Well, so what Christian is talking about is that some of these three-dimensional structures that I showed you, we presented at Takt with a VR system at one time. So wearing VR glasses, you could actually walk around or even go inside of one of these three-dimensional structures. And I am fascinated by this idea. I think right now the systems have some limitations which disappoint me in the resolution, especially when you're doing things with simple geometry like lines or geometric primitives. You see right away the aliasing that happens because of the low resolution, and if you get complex tangles of lines, then the experience is really not adequate. So I'm a little bit disappointed with the current state of the technology. That's changing fast. Also changing fast is the cost, which is coming down. So I expect that I'm going to be doing more VR work in the future. It just depends on my access to such systems and the improvements in those systems. And I know Takt is working to get a VR presentation going even as early as this summer. So talk to the Takt folks, because I know there are good things in the works. And if that's true, that will definitely tempt me to work faster to get some VR content going.
Have you ever looked at Mandelbaum?
Oh, ich glaube, ja.
So any other questions, folks?
Frank, I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, Harold.
Hey.
Ich wollte was sagen.
Ich wollte auch was sagen.
Okay, sorry guys. I will make it short. Well, first of all, I'm a fan of your work, and I met you at Takt, and you see maybe in the background in the pictures. And somebody asked, how is the impression about, on the computer and if it's printed? I honestly have to say, it's really different, because at the computer you can really see the 3D movement as an example, and you really know it's three-dimensional and you're impressed by that. But here, I mean, I have here 3 views of the same object in different scales, and people can't tell really what's going on. So for them, it's 3 different pictures. So yeah, it needs a lot of explanation. And so on the computer screen, it's a more experience of the customer or the viewer, or however you call him. What I did not understand is, maybe I didn't listen too carefully, was your alphabet. So did you somehow, do now art in the sense of you invented for each letter your own art, and then you wrote the book again? I mean, if I can, is it possible to read now a story if I know your letters, or is everything more? Is it more on an artificial level, and it's just copied from there? I don't have the right words, but I think you understood me.
Yes. So, well, first of all, thank you for showing off another example of my work on your wall. So I appreciate that a lot. That lets everybody know that it's possible to hang my artwork on your wall. And I
by the way, let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, Frank.
Yeah.
But there was in the chat, there was also the question, if you may, if you can post some of your work. I mean, what was Cecilia wrote it? Let's see. And I think it's a good question. She was saying, can you post your stuff so that we can download it? So, I mean, this is a good chance to do it right now, before we are all gone. Sorry, because when we are gone, it's too late to tell you.
Yeah. So to everybody, like, my art website is just mauceriart.com. So my last name and the word art. And Cecilia just posted the link in the chat.
Thanks.
But I don't think there's any video on the website.
There's no video on the website. So sorry about that. I need to remedy that. But and also there's no real work from the last year, but it's all a little bit older. So, but there is a lot of work on the website. I also have an Instagram site where I'm just constantly posting teasers of my current, whatever I'm doing that week. So, so you can kind of follow sort of my trajectory on Instagram. And please don't hesitate to email me if you want to see more. I'm happy to provide more. So now I've got to recover what your question was. Remind me what your question was.
The letters. Can I read a story in your art?
Yes. So I generate an alphabet, and that alphabet could be used as a cipher. In other words, I could do a one-to-one mapping between letters of the English alphabet or the German alphabet, and we could reproduce a known text using my invented alphabet. That's not how I use it. I generate a random text, so it's really not a nonsensical text, and that's kind of following the story from Borges, who posits this library that contains all possible random configurations of the text. So all sensible texts that are possible, and all nonsensical texts that are possible are present in his library. So I just generate a text randomly. Of course, randomly I could be generating Shakespeare, but probably not. But I'm following the spirit of the Borges story when I generate a random text. And every page uses a unique alphabet. So that's a little bit different than what Borges suggests.
During your Berlin time, I saw a lot of your works, and I think the focus, and the focus was mainly on the structure for me. And today I saw quite a lot of works who are touching me in a different way, because they are so organic and nearly vulnerable. And this is a big difference for me, from my experience, with your work. Thank you.
Thank you for that report.
They looked like a bit furry over texture. I think this in the middle of this talk. I can imagine what you mean.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating how a formal process can reveal how formal it is, can really reveal its structure in very simple ways. Kind of the abstraction is available to us, but the formal structure can also result in things that are very subtle and lyrical and organic. Yeah, the same structure can have very different consequences and very different emotional connections and awareness. So thank you for that report. That's nice to hear.
Frank, we follow you since quite a while now, and we were working together already. So I have a question about collaboration. I would like to know, what is your intention when you collaborate with someone in terms of music, of whatever it is? I mean, there's always something you want to figure out, or what's your team behind. So that's something it interests me to listen to now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really think collaboration is one of the most important ways we have of working. I really need to be getting ideas from other people and sharing ideas, and even just describing a process, sharing things with you, having an audience transforms the way I think about my own work. So to enter into a project with a partner or with a group means reconceiving your own position and your own inclinations. And already this is happening just by communicating those to other people, and then being flexible enough to incorporate the ideas of others into your own work. But I really welcome collaboration and really value it. And when like your the conversations that we had about the Borges short story sent me on one of my most productive periods in Takt. That whole Babel project just exploded because of our work together. So yeah, I think productivity is really very, very important, and I'm happy to. Yeah, if you want to collaborate, give me a call.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, folks, I would love to like keep going, but to be honest, in 45 minutes I have to deliver a lecture to a electronic music class that's a bit underprepared because I was trying to prepare this lecture.
Thank you so much, Frank. That's amazing.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really so happy to see all of you, and please stay in touch.
Thank you, Frank.
It was wonderful.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. See you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Tomorrow, Frank.
Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you so much. Beautiful work.